Good morning. Let's call this meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Whitburn.
Here.
Elo Rivera is absent. Montgomery Stepp is absent. Hall.
Here.
Marino.
Present.
Bush is absent. Goebel.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Clerk. Let's move to non-agenda public comment. This provides 2 minutes for anyone who would like to comment on something that is not on today's agenda, but is within the purview of MTS. Clerk, do we have any non-agenda public comment?
We do. Alex Wong, please unmute yourself now.
During MTS's November board meeting, Chair Whitburn questioned the premise that an external 2 to 4 minute headway provides a lot of value over a 7.5 minute headway on a trolley for airport travelers. However, Sandag's report says the airport trolley will only run at 15-minute frequencies, not 7.5-minute frequencies. And even if airport travelers are fine with 15 minutes frequencies, if we want rail to go beyond the airport and serve Liberty Station, Midway Rising, and Navmore, then ultra-high frequencies are crucial. When people have to wait up to 15 minutes for a trolley while they can drive from Midway Rising to Santa Fe Depot in 12 minutes, they're going to drive. When people have to wait up to 15 minutes for a trolley while they can drive from Navmore to Liberty Station in 7 minutes, they're going to drive. When people have to wait up to 15 minutes for a trolley while they can drive from Riverwalk to Liberty Station in 11 minutes, they're going to drive. The only way to entice people to take transit between these destinations is through the 2-minute frequencies that the People Mover will provide. Remember, frequency is an even bigger driver of ridership than speed because studies show that passengers perceive 1 minute of wait time as being equivalent to 2 or 3 minutes of in-vehicle time. Even for airport travelers, 2-minute frequencies versus 15-minute frequencies makes a massive difference. We've all been there. We get to the airport 2 hours before our flight thinking we'll make it to the boarding gates an hour and a half early. But for whatever reason, airport check-in or security or customs takes 2 to 3 times longer than normal, and we just barely make it to the gate before it closes. And then we make it mental notes to never wait up to 15 minutes for the airport trolley again. And next time we ask our neighbor or our friends to drive us to the airport. Wait times at the airports are notoriously unpredictable, but waiting for the train shouldn't be.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. We will move to approval of the minutes for November 2nd, 2023. Clerk, do we have any public comment on the minutes?
We do not.
All right.
I'll move to approve.
We have a motion by Member Hall and a second by Vice Chair Goebel to approve the minutes of November 2nd. Do we have any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. That motion carries. All right, let's move on to our discussion and report items. And we're going to begin with item 4, the 2024 legislative program. And Julia Tour will provide our presentation.
Great. Thank you, Chair. So as the Chair mentioned, I'll be going over the draft 2024 legislative program. Before I get started, just a quick background on this. The program's purpose is to guide advocacy efforts. It's not meant to be fully comprehensive. So we'll certainly bring back any key specific legislative items as needed. And we'll collaborate with regional municipalities and key stakeholders on any of our initiatives and priorities throughout the year. So in your attachment, you have an entire list of all of our priorities this year. So instead of going through each item individually, I've just gone through and highlighted some of the key items in each of the sections of the program. So under transit funding, I'll note that we will support legislation that would generate new revenues for transit projects and operating costs. We'll seek subsidies for specialized fare programs that are supported by this board. And we will collaborate with the California Transit Transformation Task Force on reviewing existing metrics for the qualification and distribution of TDA. And we'll talk a little bit more about this task force later on in this presentation. And then also we'll be seeking funding for a number of capital projects, one of which, as you know, is a priority is the Clean Transit Advancement Campus. We will be supporting equity and social justice measures that help to better serve and deliver equitable transportation options. We'll seek funding and resources to implement any program that could help persons experiencing homelessness throughout our system. Then under climate change, we'll continue to support efforts that address issues of climate change and increase our ability to play a lead role in addressing this. Moving on to transit-oriented development, we will continue to support legislation that aids our efforts to create high-density TODs. Public safety will seek legislation that promotes employee safety, including higher penalties for assaults on transit workers. Again, this item I'm going to talk a little bit more about later on. Under regulatory matters, we will oppose unfunded mandates that negatively impact transit operators and will seek dedicated funding to offset those costs for any new regulatory requirements that are put forward. Labor relations, monitor and respond to the legislation designed to clarify provisions of the Public Employees Pension Reform Act, or PEPRA. And then we will support legislative programs of other agencies or organizations where it's consistent with our program. So again, this was just a very high level snapshot of some of the items that you will see in the program, but a full comprehensive list is in the attachment, including in the packet. So now what I want to do is recap 2023 with a couple of items that I think we want to highlight. And this first one, we all are very well aware of, SB 125, but I still wanted to recap it. We will have a full item on this at the next agenda item, but did want to recap that we worked really closely with the other transit agencies in the state, as well as the California Transit Association, or CTA, in advocating for this. At the SB 125 bill, it essentially instituted the framework that we have to follow to access the $5.1 billion in one-time funding that was included in the Budget Act. Another point about SB 125 is it extended statutory relief measures for transit agencies that were instituted during COVID. So that's things like fare box recovery ratio requirements. And it also established a new state-level transit transformation task force. So this is something that CalSTA is convening, and the task force is going to develop policy recommendations to grow transit ridership and improve the transit experience. And it'll submit a report of the findings and policy recommendations by October 2025. So that kind of goes in alignment with the statutory relief extensions. And the task force membership should be announced any day now. So we are hoping to have positive news, and that hopefully our CEO will be a member of that task force. So we will update the board as soon as we have that information. Okay, so Surplus Lands Act bills. There were a number of these. Again, we worked close with a number of transit agencies and with CTA in addressing some of the issues related to Surplus Lands Act that we've experienced. Some of the amendments included, various exemptions and technical changes that will benefit us in any development and joint development projects. And one thing to note on this is that we were able to get an extension for the DDA for the joint MTS City of Chula Vista East Street TOD project. So now that DDA deadline has been extended to 2027. AB 719, this was our non-medical and non-emergency medical transportation bill. Unfortunately, this bill was vetoed. The bill would have required Medi-Cal managed care plans to contract with us as a public transit operator to establish reimbursement rates for any eligible non-medical and non-emergency medical trips provided by us. So the governor noted in his veto message concerns related to potential conflicts with federal Medicaid regulations. We are seeing in federal guidelines that encourage state support and partially reimbursing public transit operators for these NMT and NEMT services. So we are in the process of setting up debriefs with the governor's staff and learning, more about their concerns and seeking additional clarification on the federal guidelines to hopefully try again at this in the future to ensure that we can find a way to be able to get partial reimbursement for some of these services. One of the successful bills, SB 790, this was the Public Records Act clarification bill that we put forward. So essentially this bill specifies that a government contract for goods or services is a public record subject to disclosure under the PRA. And any provision in a written agreement that states a government contract is exempt from this public disclosure is void and unenforceable. So sometimes we have vendors that state in their contracts that their information in there is confidential. This bill was able to clarify the underlying intent of the PRA, ensuring that those documents are subject to disclosure. So it'll help expedite some of our contract processes. Looking ahead at 2024, we have 2 proposals, both of which will be working in coordination with CTA as co-sponsors. So one of which is that seeking legislation that promotes employee safety, which includes higher penalties for assaults on transit workers. So this proposal would amend the penal code to state that battery committed against an employee of a public transit district would be charged with higher penalties. So currently, operators and ticket agents are protected under this section, but this would allow for all public transit workers to be covered while they're in the performance of their duties. So this is, again, a co-sponsorship with CTA, and so we will be looking for an author for 2024, and we'll update you along the way as how this process goes. Our second proposal. This proposed amendment is an amendment to the vehicle code that would allow all transit agencies the ability to equip a lighted yield right-of-way sign to the rear of the transit bus. Currently, only 2 transit agencies in the state are allowed to do this, Santa Cruz and Santa Clara. There are no financial penalties that would be associated with this bill, but what we've seen at these other agencies is that it does help to enhance safety and efficiency of the buses as they're pulling out back into traffic. And so if someone is driving behind them and you see a lighted yield to bus sign, it might give them pause to go ahead and let them in instead of speeding by. So we're hoping to be able to have the ability to equip these on our vehicles as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our state and federal lobbyists to give brief updates. We have Mark Watts he is our state lobbyist, and then after Mark, we'll have Peter Pizer, who is our federal lobbyist. So we'll go ahead and start with Mark.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Executive Committee, for having me here today. Briefly, there's a couple of key things I want to talk about that are pretty well expected to be viewed each December. First, the legislative analysts, I'm sure you saw reports of this in a blog post that they issued earlier in the month, estimated that there would be a shortfall in revenue for a number of reasons for the current fiscal year. They actually also looked a few years ahead and said, well, actually the shortfall in revenue is going to be in the $58 billion level below the Budget Act assumptions, and half of that is going to be seen in the current year budget. So that's step one. That's the revenue picture. The next step is later today, the ledge analysts will actually release their formal projection of the deficit or the condition of the state budget, which will include not just the revenue shortfall that they've identified, but also workload or cost growth, so you can get a better picture of what the legislature and the governor will be dealing with throughout the next year. And with this sizable level of a shortfall, it's going to take a lot of effort. I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit were adjusted in the current year budget, and to see this shortfall this large coming through at this point in time for the 2024 budget is somewhat distressing. I will note that most of the transit or transportation program funding sources would be protected from what we used to see in the 80s and 90s, where funds were redistributed to help balance the general fund. But under various initiatives, those have been locked down. There are 2 areas there where there's still some vulnerability that particularly could affect transit agencies, and that would be revenues from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that source or serve as a source for several programs administered by ARB for transit purposes. In addition, the general fund appropriations, for example, the amount that were included or associated with SB 125 have no protections, and it could provide a sizable target for helping balance out other program needs. So we'll have to keep a close watch on that as January 10th comes up. We'll see what the governor, how he starts off the budget year in lieu or in view of this revenue and unbalanced budget. The other thing that's been occurring on a slow rolling basis was following his election last year as Speaker, Assemblymember Rivas in late November started announcing his membership team or his leadership team. And in this vein, he also appointed new chairs to most of the committees. In other words, the committee chairs that had been exercising their authority under the previous speaker are no longer in those positions, and new chairs have been selected. In the transportation area, the chair for the Transportation Committee will be Assemblymember Lori Wilson from Northern California. She represents parts of Solano County where Fairfield exists, and East Contra Costa County where several of the small cities such as Pittsburgh and Antioch and others are located. I think because of her personal experience within the district, working in the private sector on market rate housing, I think a lot of transportation stakeholders are assuming she will take a little bit more flexible approach to chairing the committee than the immediately past Chair Friedman from Glendale. In addition, the Appropriations Committee has been assigned a new chair. Assemblymember Wicks from Oakland area will now replace Assemblymember Holden from Pasadena. And in the Budget Committee itself, long-standing chair Phil Teen from San Francisco is being replaced by Jesse Gabriel from Encino, California. In the Assembly Budget Subcommittee, which is very important for making for viewing the transportation budget, there is no change there. We have a very solid member, Assemblymember Bennett from Ventura. He will continue in that position, and we're looking forward to continuing to work with him. I would like to point out one update that I had not provided to Julia yet, and that is there's a select committee on reconnecting communities informational hearing this Friday at the Cesar Chavez campus of the San Diego College of Continuing Education. The agenda is out, and I'll make sure that I forward that to her. Mr. Alvarez is the chair of this select committee, and he is very, very interested in looking at opportunities where the state could allow or authorize, or communities could seek lidding, they call it, of certain freeways like you have in San Diego, and Seattle has some. So it be very informative select committee hearing, and I look forward to following that. Last comment I would make, Senator Wiener is conducting or had conducted his select committee on regional transportation issues for the Bay Area. I mention this because he's going to introduce a bill to seek additional revenues. It's going to target the Bay Area region only, but I think once that gets into play, there will be interested parties around the state that would take a look at maybe replicating what he's trying to do. So I just want to call that to your attention as we head into the bill introduction period. And that completes my report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, members of the Executive Committee. It's good to meet you. So it's a busy time here in Washington, as you've been reading, I'm sure. There's a lot of debate at the moment over supplemental funding proposals for Ukraine, Israel, Southeast Asia, and the border. But while that is making news, there's a lot of work behind the scenes to try to advance the regular annual appropriation bills for the fiscal year that started October 1. And there has not been significant progress in bridging the gap between the House and the Senate for those spending bills, and in particular for transportation HUD, which they are combined into one spending bill. There's some significant gaps, particularly on public transit spending and on Amtrak spending, that are making it very difficult to reach an agreement at the very leadership level. The new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, this week has submitted to the Senate a proposal for the overall, or what they call top line spending amounts for domestic discretionary spending and defense spending. That proposal at that high level does leave significant ground to cover if there's going to be a compromise. Right now, Congress and the country are operating under a continuing resolution that has two different dates for its expiration. On January 19th, funding for transportation HUD and three other departments will cease and will require some sort of a continuing resolution to avoid a shutdown. The rest of government is funded right now through February 2nd. So there is a little breathing room here as we approach the holiday season for a deal to get made before those deadlines come. But as you hear about all of that being discussed, and it'll be very newsworthy, something to keep in mind is that earlier this year, when Congress and the president reached a deal on raising the national debt ceiling and continuing the appropriations process, they agreed to put a floor on fiscal 24 spending of 1% below the previous year level. What that means is if there is no deal on these pending appropriation bills between the House and the Senate, that underneath that process is a provision in that earlier legislation that will enact a full year continuing resolution for all of government with a 1% across the board cut. So the risk here for the programs that MTS relies on is not that substantial. But hopefully they will come to an agreement that is potentially a little bit better than that. But I'm not giving that a very high odds at the moment. But it is very much in discussion. So more to come on that. Also, in that process, Congress will decide what to do with what we used to call earmarks, but which are now called, on the House side, community project funding, and on the Senate side, congressionally directed spending. There are three earmarks for MTS in the House version of the Transportation HUD appropriation bill. One is for the SeaTac campus. And then there are earmarks for Blue Line and Green Line trolley passenger information systems and improvements there. The total for all three of those is about $2.3 million. That money is at risk in this conversation that's going on about the annual appropriation bills. If they do not reach a deal on those bills and we have to have this full year continuing resolution, there's a pretty substantial chance that those project earmarks will get dropped in the process. So we are in touch with our delegation about that on a regular basis. They, of course, are aware of the risk and very attentive to this issue, and will be, working to try to preserve that funding as that process continues. So the next year, the fiscal year 25 process will kick off early in the year when the president's budget comes out. That's usually in February. It may get delayed because of these other debates about the current year funding. But something to keep an eye on there as the budget and appropriations process unfolds in calendar year 2024 is there is a potential that there'll be some discussion about additional operating assistance for public transit. And your legislative program in draft form does include a couple of entries that deal with operating assistance. One on the generic form of operating support, and the other in potential support for discounted fare programs. Both of those, from the Washington perspective, would be considered operating assistance, and there is a growing constituency for that at the federal level. Congress 40 years ago prohibited, as a general matter, federal money to be used for operating assistance for large transit agencies like MTS. But they broke through that prohibition in the COVID aid packages that went through. But now that those are winding down, there is still a need in a lot of regions of the country for additional assistance. You may have heard the term fiscal cliff applied to the condition of a number of transit agencies around the country. And some of them are approaching that in the fiscal year 2025 timeframe. And so there will be a potential for operating assistance to be added to the program next year in the appropriations process. And we'll certainly be keeping an eye on that and working with our delegation to support that portion of the MTS legislative program. And then, of course, in addition to this legislative activity, we have a really substantial amount of work going on to implement the infrastructure law that was passed almost 2 years ago, or a little more than 2 years ago, and which is now rolling out pretty aggressively a number of grant programs. And that's of particular interest with regard to the SeaTac campus. There is a very large resource at the federal level for funding bus facilities, and in particular, low and no emissions buses and bus facilities. We feel like we have a very strong proposal at this point for SeaTac in this national competition, given the progress that's been made around that project. And that's going to be a major focus for us in 2025. The federal government will release a notice of funding opportunity on that program probably in late January, early February, with applications due in the spring. And we'll be working very closely together with the MTS team and our congressional delegation and other stakeholders to build support for that application. It's a very significant funding opportunity and will be a very high priority for the year ahead. So with that, I think I'll wrap up, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning.
Thanks, Peter. So I'll just wrap up with noting the staff recommendation, which is have the executive committee forward a recommendation to the board of directors to approve the 2024 legislative program. With that, we'll take any comments or questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tour. Thank you, Mr. Watts and Mr. Pizer. Please stay on the line for just a minute in case there are any questions or comments from the committee. And in the meantime, we'll check in with the clerk and see if there's any public comment.
There are none.
Okay. With that, then we will begin our committee discussion with Member Hall.
I'm fine. I'm going to make a motion just to move the item.
Oh, all right. We have a motion to adopt the staff recommendation from Member Hall, and we will go now to Member Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Julia, for your work on this, and to everyone involved. I know there's a lot of work that goes into this, and the result is a holistic and comprehensive platform that certainly would benefit our transit agency if we were able to get it all done. The only slight modification that I was hoping I could offer is in line 20. No surprise, this is related to access to public restrooms. The language in line 20 says seek subsidies for the operation of public restrooms at transit stations. We wanted to slightly broaden what MTS would engage in on that issue, and one that's seeking direct funding. So the language we have is seeking direct funding for the operation of public restrooms and supporting cost recovery measures for public bathroom access. This was important to us because while we understand that MTS isn't restricted in the same way as cities are, we also don't think that the entire responsibility for providing public restroom access should fall on MTS. And the more able our local municipalities are to provide that access, the more likely it is that we'll have a robust network that serves our riders well. And so, trying to obviously find some direct funding here for MTS to operate those restrooms, but additionally making it easier for cities to recover costs so that they can do the same.
Great. Yeah, we can certainly add that into the program for the final version that we bring to the board.
Thank you so much. With that, happy to offer a second.
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question. Is this also something that is in the city's legislative program? Oh, perfect. Then Julia can work with them. Thanks.
Very good. All right, seeing no further committee discussion, I do have one question. Mr. Watts, are you still on the line?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I am.
I had one question for you because I think you referenced Senate Bill 125 funding, which caught my ear because that is actually the next item that we're going to be discussing here at the committee. Did I hear you say that as we get into next year that SB 125 funding could be vulnerable to efforts at the state level to try to address the deficit?
Here's how I would answer that, if you don't mind. I have a long history of doing budgets. I was actually on the budget staff a long time ago in the 80s. And during that period, it was frequently the case that funding for transit and some of the highway programs were redirected for general fund purposes. And my comment I was trying to make was, or trying to emphasize was, the source of the funding for TIRCP and other programs was general fund, not protected in the way that STA, TDA, and some of the highway programs are. So to me, it is something to be aware of and understand that it could be put into play. To the extent that allocations have been made, and there's been a lot since the approval of the budget last summer, those would not be, in my mind, at play. But I think anything that's left over at this point in time could be, depending on the severity of the shortfall. So it was a cautionary note, not an alarmist note.
Okay, I appreciate that context. Thank you very much, Mr. Watts.
Welcome.
Yes, and let's go to Member Moreno.
I just had a quick question. It was mentioned that Senator Wiener had done something, and I'm sorry I didn't catch that.
Yes, let me clarify. He conducted his select committee on Bay Area transit, I think a week and a half ago. And one action item that came out and was fully expected to was his announcement that he intends to collaborate with MTC in assembling a Bay Area funding program of new tax revenues for transit purposes. So my comment there, after making that statement, was I believe if he puts that into play, it wouldn't be extraordinary for other areas of the state to try to collaborate with him, or get the same package going at the same time, or join his package. So that's all I was trying to communicate, is that he's got the intent. They're drafting a bill. We haven't seen it yet. And in fact, there's a bill drafting discussion today in the Bay Area, but I do fully expect once he puts it into play that there will be pressure to expand that to other areas of the state.
Okay, I guess I don't know enough about the committee that he selected and how that works, so maybe I could ask offline.
And I think just to elaborate, the Bay Area transit operators are in much more dire straits than those here in San Diego. And so I think the intent is they're the ones that have the biggest problem, and we need to fix it. Well, I think Mark's point was that doesn't mean that it can't trickle down to San Diego as well, or LA, or any of the other parts of the state, that if they open that can, we will all be probably brought into it.
Yeah, we certainly shouldn't be punished for managing our system correctly, so I agree with that.
If I might interject for just 1 second, the select committee is a special type of committee that is designed to make studies of different issues. For example, Mr. Alvarez's select committee is on the select committee on reconnecting communities. So they are really study committees, and they use them to frame future potential legislation or regulatory changes. It's not a full acting committee. They can't adopt anything other than recommendations. So I hope that clarifies. I didn't mean to be
Thank you.
misleading.
No, that
Okay.
definitely clarifies. I obviously don't know how the state runs, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, thank you very much, Member Moreno. Seeing no further committee discussion, we will again thank Mr. Watts and Mr. Pizer for those updates and Ms. Tour for the presentation. We have a motion from Member Hall and a second from Member Elo Rivera that the Executive Committee forward a recommendation to the Board of Directors to approve the 2024 legislative program with the one modification brought forward by Member Elo Rivera. Seeing no further discussion, all those in, well, let's go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Whitburn,
Yes.
Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Montgomery Step is absent. Hall,
Yes.
Moreno,
Yes.
Bush,
Yes.
Coble.
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 members voting yes and 1 member absent.
Thank you very much, Clerk. All right, we'll move on to item number 5. Item 5 is the Senate Bill 125 allocation package. And Dennis Desmond will provide the presentation. Please feel free to proceed once you get set up and settled in.
And while he's getting set up, I can just let you know that we have learned from CalSTA that they're going to be fulfilling requests for funding from the SB 125 pot based on a first come, first serve basis. And we want to be first come, first serve. So
Good morning. Thank you. And it sounds like there's a wide familiarity with the SB 125 already. And as you know, we came to the executive committee last month with this allocation package. We'd like to come back to you today, talk about the work that we've been doing, which is really a continuation of what we presented last month. So it'll be very familiar to you. We've been working on the application itself, putting the package together so that we can bring it to you today with a recommendation to take to the board next week. So the SB 125 funding comes out of the state budget. We're anticipating to receive approximately $284 million over the next 4 fiscal years. This would augment our existing capital and operating budgets. And there are 2 main packages of this SB 125. Excuse me. One is a Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, TIRCP, and the other is Zero Emission Transit Capital Program, ZETCP, neither of which are easy to say. We anticipate that most of this funding will come to us in the first 2 years, with a little bit of the ZETCP funding trailing in years 3 and 4. For the legislative intent of Senate Bill 125, for the capital funding and the, for the capital funding under both TIRCP and ZETCP, there expect to be projects that demonstrate reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. The TIRCP can be additional funding for previously approved TIRCP projects, which we are proposing. And then the ZETCP can be used for the purchase of ZEBs, zero emission buses, for infrastructure for those buses, modifying bus divisions to accommodate those zero emission buses, and that kind of thing. So that's what you're going to see in our application. For the operations funding, the intent is to retain as much service as possible. Again, a big part of this is addressing the fiscal cliff that many agencies are approaching much faster than we are even. So retention of that service, excuse me, the restoration of services that has been cut over the past couple of years. In our case, largely because of a shortage of bus operators. And then increasing service with the prioritization of services assisting transit dependent riders. It can also be used to ensure safety and state of good repair for vehicles and other infrastructure, free and reduced fare programs, planning expenses related to implementation of services and ridership recovery and retention strategies, and operating expenses for services intended to increase ridership specifically, and also expenses that would increase ridership through improved safety and security measures. And you're going to see a little bit of all of this in our application. So there's a big push in the SB 125 to include social equity parameters in this. So both of them include language for both the TIRCP and ZETCP. The capital projects must, and this is directly from the legislation itself, must demonstrate how the project is expected to provide direct, meaningful, and assured benefits to a disadvantaged community, low-income communities, or low-income households as defined specifically by SB 535 and AB 1550. And I'll show you a map of what those look like in San Diego coming up. Transit operations request, which we will have, must identify benefits to transit dependent riders for activities that would be funded by these requests. So here's an example of the social equity analysis that we did for the package for new operations funding. So we actually did the SB 535 analysis as well as an AB 1550 analysis. And we also did our own Title VI analysis, which is not a state process. That's actually an FTA requirement for major service changes. And we did all four of these different analyses. And as you can see in the results, you can see the overall service area population for the entire service area under these various categories. SB 535 disadvantaged communities include 11% of our population, but 19% of the population that would benefit from these operational improvements would be considered disadvantaged under SB 535. Under AB 1550, 40% of our service area is considered low income, but 53% of the benefiting population under AB 1550 would be considered low income. And then in Title VI, both for the minority and low income categories, again, the benefiting population under our proposals here is greater than the service area average overall for the MTS service area. For the social equity analysis for our capital funding, we're looking specifically at the ZETCP, in this case, the ZETCP capital projects. These four projects would directly serve over 100 different communities that are considered both SB 535 disadvantaged and AB 1550 low income communities, with more than 800 jobs being made available in these communities. Of the four ZETCP capital projects, and these are 4 bus divisions, 3 are located in areas that are both AB 1550 low income and SB 535 disadvantaged. The fourth, Kearney Mesa, is not in either, although it's borders areas that are 1550 low income. Also, in addition to just the division itself, the improvements in the electrification projects at the divisions themselves, of course, the buses that run out of these divisions will be run through the communities, not just obviously at the division itself. The map on the screen here shows this is actually the Callan virus screen map, and it shows census block groups in blue that are SB 535 disadvantaged communities, and in red that are AB 1550 low income communities. And of course, there's some overlap there. Most of the SB 535 disadvantaged communities are also AB 1550 low income. So see, I think I can use a pointer here. There we go. In the South Bay and Southern Chula Vista along Main Street, that's our South Bay division. That's again in both the low income and disadvantaged census block group. Right on the center left is our Imperial Avenue division, again also in AB 1550 and SB 535 area. Same with our El Cajon division in East County in the upper right. And then the 4th division, Kearney Mesa, again is not in either an AB 1550 or SB 535, but it does have some AB 1550 communities surrounding it, and that's obviously where we'd be running buses. For the zero emission transit capital program, the proposed projects, again, it's the electrification at our 4 divisions. So we propose to spend $46 million of the SB SB 125 funding on these projects, building out electrification through 2029 at the 4 facilities. We've already completed phase 1 at our South Bay facilities. That's the 24 positions, and that project supports our new Iris Rapid route that just began service in October of this year. So the SB 125 money would fund phase 2, which would be 49 new positions at the South Bay. It would also fund phase 1 at the other 3 divisions, including 3 charging positions at the Imperial Avenue Division, 27 at the Kearney Mesa Division, and 32 at the East County Division. For the TIRCP capital program proposed projects, the first is the security enhancements that were approved by the board in September of this year. This increases our security staffing in a number of different fields, including inspectors, dispatchers, and some field support. We propose using $3.5 million per year to help fund this initiative. And again, this was approved by the board in September, and this came out of various focus groups and customer satisfaction survey results. The other big project is the Orange Line Improvement Project. Approximately 10 years ago, in the mid 2010s, we did a major blue line renewal effort that really reconstructed the entire blue line. We did some of those customer facing amenities on the Orange Line as well, but we didn't do the underlying infrastructure. So this project would do that on the Orange Line. So things like the overhead catenary, the signals, the crossing, grade crossings, the switches, track work, that kind of thing, that would all be completed on the Orange Line. So a very significant project to improve service reliability, operating flexibility, as well as safety, community safety, and rider safety, and enhancing the experience. And it actually does not only improve the experience and reliability, but we also save some running time with these improvements as well. So this project would provide the same level of service on the Orange Line that the customers of the Blue Line have been enjoying since that Blue Line renewal in the mid 2010s. So we propose using $26 million of the SB 125 money for this. That won't cover the entire project. We'll still have some CIP funding supporting this as well. In terms of service enhancements, we're proposing both bus and trolley service enhancements. To talk about the trolley first. The first is to spend $8 million a year to increase frequency up to 15 minutes all day, every day on all 3 lines. So we actually already did this for the most part on the Blue Line about a year ago. All of the lines were operating 30-minute service, especially late night. Weekends on the green and orange lines were running a lot of 30-minute frequencies still. So this would allow us to bring that up to 15 minutes all day, every day again on all 3 of the lines. The Orange Line improvements would take effect a little bit later because we would need to complete this modernization project that I just talked about first before we could enhance those frequencies. However, we could, if desired, improve the frequencies on Route 4, which parallels the Orange Line as a supplement during the construction period. The Green Line frequency would have to be paused in the middle of that to do some of those later phase improvements on the Orange Line, since the Orange and Green Line share some right of way out in the East County. Additionally, we're proposing $3.7 million to improve the Blue Line frequencies, to increase service to 7.5 minutes between all the way from the border to UTC during peak periods. So it currently operates essentially peaks in midday. For most of the day, 7.5 minutes already between the border and downtown. This would extend those 7.5 minute trips up to UTC during peak periods on the weekdays. And that would start in June of 2025. For bus service enhancements, they really fall in 3 buckets. The first bucket is to fund operations of the Iris Rapid. Again, this is our Rapid 227 that just began operations in October of this year, when we would use approximately $4 million per year of the SB 125 to fund that. The second bucket is to restore service that we lost primarily in 2022 due to driver shortages. So we would spend approximately $8 million per year in the SB 125 money to restore those services over the next year or two. And then we're proposing $8 million for new services. These are new improvements to existing routes as well as a new route. A lot of these improvements were identified in Elevate SD, which we weren't able to implement. But they also include some priorities that we've heard from our social equity listening tour and from our social equity working group. It would include a new route, which I'll talk about, new Blue Line Express bus route. We would operate between downtown and the border when the trolley is not able to run. Other span increases for later evening service, some increased weekend and evening frequencies. And then we've of course prioritized disadvantaged communities in the selection of the services. So on the screen here is the sample package of what $8 million would buy. This is actually a very solid proposal for what could be put in. We've got some service improvements really throughout the county, but again, prioritizing the disadvantaged communities. And really a highlight of this is that new proposed border route that would run overnight. I think this is something that would be successful from day one. So we would want to implement this hopefully as soon as possible. The proposal here is to run it approximately every 30 minutes, 7 days a week. There's some planning that needs to be done before this can be started. The other improvements on here, we have improvements to Route 4, which is our Imperial Avenue corridor. Again, we could run these more frequently during the Orange Line construction to make up for that when we couldn't run the additional Orange Line service. But it would bring that up to 15 minutes between downtown and Euclid Transit Center all day long on weekdays. And then we have a lot of 60-minute service on that route, 60-minute frequencies on the weekends. So we'd bring it up to 30 minutes all day on both Saturday and Sunday. There's a number of routes that we're operating Sunday frequencies at 60 minutes right now. So we would take the opportunity to bring those up to every 30 minutes to improve those services. And then we have a couple of routes that serve communities out in the East County and Southeastern County that are running every 60 minutes on weekdays, actually. Both of these are very solid routes, very high ridership routes. We'd like to bring those up to every 30 minutes. And then operating some later span on many of our core network routes. You see here 3, 10, 12, and 235. We also are proposing to spend some money, some of the SB 125 money to improve our bus stop accessibility. This is a project, a capital project that we actually already have now. We upgrade bus stops for ADA compliance and build the hardscape infrastructure to place for future amenities there. Many of our bus stops, and we have over 4,000 bus stops, predate the ADA, and they do need hardscape improvements for full compliance for ADA. We do a number of projects each year through our CIP program, and this would allow us to do some more. We would allocate approximately $1 million in the SB 125 funding that would add about 20 stops per year. So again, we would add the ADA compliant boarding area. There are a number of requirements and what that needs to look like. And then we would build that to accommodate future benches and shelters wherever we could. The other area that we wanted to focus on with this money was the Otay Mesa area. Otay Mesa, if you're familiar with the area, and I know that Councilmember Moreno certainly is, but it's grown out incredibly over the last 20 years. We haven't been able to keep up with that. We haven't received funding to provide new additional services out there. So this is an opportunity to do that. What we need to do is a study to look at the area. There's substantial continued expansion, future expansion, all the way out to the new Otay Mesa East Port of Entry that's going to open up in a couple of years. The roadways are extended. Every single time I go out there, the roadways have extended out a little bit farther. There's more warehousing and other light industry going in up there. There's going to be future improvements that are going to be needed. And we have a lot of areas out there and a lot of major trip generators that don't have service. Amazon has, I believe, almost 10,000 employees working out there. They're running their own shuttle services right now, but that's an opportunity that we potentially have out there as well. The Cross-Border Express facility is another one. And then communities like Ocean View Hills that maybe weren't built out 20 years ago are there now and don't have service. So we'd like to do a comprehensive study of the entire area and figure out how we can better serve the area. So what we're proposing is $500,000 for a study that would be done next year. And then an additional $1.5 million in operating costs for future routes and services that could be added out there. So what you see on the screen here is a summary of the entire SB 125 proposed allocation package at this point, both capital and operations funding. Again, it adds up to that $284 million that we're anticipating receiving. In addition to everything else that I've mentioned here, we're also proposing to use some amount to do some structural deficit balancing that would be required to balance our annual budget through the FY28 fiscal year. So our recommendation today is that the executive committee forward to the board of directors this a recommendation to approve this SB 125 allocation package in substantially the same format as the attachment A, which I believe you've received. And then, as Sharon mentioned, as soon as we get board approval, we would send this off to the state so that we'd be first in line. And with that, I'm happy to thanks. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Desmond. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. Carolina Martinez, please unmute yourself now. Carolina, looks like you're still muted. Looks like you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Can you speak a little bit at a higher volume?
Yeah, is this better?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Technology. Good morning, board members and staff. My name is Carolina Martinez with the Environmental Health Coalition. We're here to request that the proposed bus frequency improvements and the 24-hour bus service along the Blue Line be implemented by fiscal year 25 to be able to provide solutions for transit riders as soon as possible. In our region, as you know, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and 70% of the jobs are not reachable by transit. Riders have continuously placed bus frequency at the top of their priority for all the community engagement processes, at least since Elevate San Diego. Frequency improvements and 24-hour service along the Blue Line will immediately result in greenhouse gas emission reductions while connecting transit riders more effectively to their destinations. The San Diego Transportation Equity Working Group met with policymakers and staff, and we're super grateful for all the time spent. MTS is very fortunate to be in a financial position to implement bus frequency increases. However, the 3-year-long driver hiring retention challenges is preventing implementation despite funding availability. In fact, significant portion of the improvements for frequency are not scheduled till 2026. That means MTS is projecting a 5-year-long hiring retention. Sorry, what?
30 seconds left.
Thank you. Hiring retention challenge. We recommend to the board and the staff to take a look at this and use some of this funding to look at opportunities to address the challenge. Most importantly, we want to ensure bus frequency and the Blue Line 24-hour bus service be implemented by 2025. Fiscal year 2025. We're looking forward to continue to work with MTS to see this come through. Thank you.
And that concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. We will begin committee discussion on this item and we'll begin with Member Moreno.
Once again, thank you for the presentation, and I can't stop reiterating how thankful I am that this body actually has a really good grasp of what's going on with the 125 money. Obviously, from the previous speaker, things have changed. It seems that things are changing at the state level, so I do understand there is a jeopardy to this money. But with that being said, one of the things that I want to, I'm really happy about what's before us. But I really want to hone in on the transparency part of the 125 money. A lot of this money is coming to us because of our equity positions, and I shouldn't say it's coming to us. We will be formidable candidates for this funding because of all the work that we have done regarding equity within the MTS jurisdiction. So I want to start off by first off thanking staff for meeting with the San Diego Transportation Equity Working Group as requested by the Board of Directors. It's my understanding that the sample package was not, the $8 million sample package was not available during that meeting. And Frank, to be honest, I checked at 10:30 yesterday and that information wasn't available for the general public. So what was the sample package presented with the working group?
So we didn't have it as part of this here, but it's the same sample package that was brought to the AC last month in November. So it was part of that agenda item.
Got you. But we didn't present that sample package to the working group a few days ago and said, hey, this is what we're presenting.
With exception of we talked about the border, the overnight downtown to the border, and we talked about some of the blue line. We didn't get into the specifics of each individual bus route.
So that would be one of my kind of, just key points. And also for the general public, 10 a.m. not having this information. I think transparency is it's definitely important to me. Like I said, I like what's on the list, right? So I don't want to be too hard, but it is important. And I don't think as an executive committee member, I want to continue to stress that for our staff. And also the other point that I wanted to bring up was one of these, I've heard from the community that they'd like to see the implementation of the overnight buses for downtown to the border accelerated from fiscal year 25 instead of 26. Can you explain to us if that's possible?
Yeah, I think that, in terms of the funding's there. We certainly have some flexibility. Again, this is something we have to submit by this month, but it's something that can be changed at any time. So we have that flexibility, I think, in the future. The specific downtown to the border overnight doesn't require additional buses. So the resources are there from that perspective. There is a driver resource issue that we're continuing to work on. But once that's resolved and we have sufficient, that's certainly something that we can prioritize if that would be the board's wish to do that.
Yeah. And I am very concerned that the ongoing driver shortage is essentially preventing us from effectively using the funding given to us, or that's going to be given to us by the state through SB 125. Does MTS have any plans to address the driver shortage?
Yeah, we are. We're aggressively recruiting right now. And in fact, on the consent calendar for the draft one for next week, we're actually adding 2 new recruiters, requesting that from the board. But we are making progress internally as well as in our contract side of the house to address the bus driver shortage. But certainly it's, a cause for concern, but it's not, I forget what Mark said, an alarmist. It's not as alarming as it was before. So we are progressively going to add back in the services that we cut because of the driver recruitment issues. And then the other piece that Dennis hasn't mentioned is with this downtown service, it's a brand new service, the one that would go overnight. We'd still have to go through the whole process of, vetting it to the public, getting input. That's why these services, they're in this allocation package, but we still have to go through the federal process, a normal process for adding service. The
And
fiscal
how long
year,
does that take? I'm sorry.
we typically do a scheduling effort and an outreach effort, and then we do, the public hearing here at the board, and then we would do the, the final, noticing. We have to do the Title VI on it. We have to do the environmental, on it, or, mitigated neg deck type of thing. But, so
What's
I
the
mean-
time frame for that though? I don't
6 months.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah, so we need to do some outreach and some planning, and that's going to be a few months to get out to the communities and make sure that we plan it the right way, that it's useful for people. And then we need to do the noticing and for the public hearing. And we can certainly accelerate that. Typically, we bring it to the board for consideration and then to come back at a later board meeting. But we can consolidate that if that was the board where they make a decision on that.
Yeah, and we do 3 times a year, we have drivers pick their work. So you have to kind of comply with that requirement in the CBA, and it's got to be noticed to them so they can then pick which routes they want to drive and which times they want to drive. And that generally we get that to the scheduled package to them 6 weeks in advance
Yeah,
of
yes,
when
about
it's
6
implemented,
weeks, yeah.
something like that.
So like 6 months is the process to implement a new line.
Yeah, I mean,
MTS,
that's
give or
pretty
take.
aggressive, but yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for those answers. I appreciate it. I think that driver shortage, we've been hearing driver shortage throughout this whole year. And, you know, one of the things that I would suggest is to the chair that the driver shortage, because it's such a huge barrier, and it seems to be a barrier in improving our timeliness of our implementations and SB 125. I think perhaps we should bring a standalone item to the board to explain the cause of this shortage and also solutions staff have identified to solve the issue. It sounds like it's getting better, but at one point it was really bad, right? So I would humbly request that the chair bring that forward. And I want to reiterate my support for this item to the full board. I'm actually happy to make a motion, right? I'm the first one on the lights. So, but I would stress that the public outreach, the transparency part of what we do here at MTS needs to continue to get better, I will say. But thank you for all the work on this item. And thank you, Sharon, for all the work that you've done at the state level. And I appreciate all the knowledge that we now have on SB 125. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Second.
For Moreno. And we have a second by member Bush, and we'll be happy to bring forward an item on the driver shortage and update on that. Let's go to member Bush.
Just a question, a point for clarification. So is that included in the motion?
What is that?
Councilmember?
No,
You don't need it in the
I don't,
motion,
no,
then.
I
Okay,
don't,
cool.
I
So
don't
maybe
need it.
January timeframe, we could.
Yeah, we
look
could
at that.
probably do something like that. Yeah, and it's not something I'm gonna talk about here, but we are gonna be going into negotiations for next year, so.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, further discussion on the item in front of us.
It's just
Member
a
Bush.
real brief. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the comments made by Councilmember Moreno. Thank you, staff, for your work on this, and I'm excited about this level of funding. As much as we go through these financial crises, this is a really good opportunity. I'm really excited to see what appears to be 24-hour service essentially with this border to downtown bus line, correct? That would make it effectively 24-hour service.
Yeah, it's actually not commonly known, but we essentially have 24-hour service now to the border. It's just local service. So this would be an.
I'm sorry, it's
express
just
service.
what?
It's just local service. So going down, Highland and Third Avenue versus the freeway. So the trolleys are more express. So this would be something that mirrors the trolley.
Got it. Okay. So yes, I'm excited about that. I support that. I think that's needed. Folks across the border, all times, and whether they're going to work or play, so I think this is really good. So I'm really excited about that. And I would support, trying to advance that portion of the funding forward, because I think it's been really proven in terms of ridership, understanding that it's going to take a few months since it's a new line, to go through the public process. But I would definitely encourage us to advance that as much as possible. And to the extent that the driver shortages are preventing this, this isn't a new issue. Yes, it's tied to negotiations. But it's something that I would like us to make a priority, so it doesn't continue to delay the implementation of these services. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Member Bush. I will also thank the team for all the work that has gone in to bringing this to this point. Tremendous amount of effort. Also want to acknowledge CEO Cooney for all the work that you have put into even creating this opportunity. As many people know, CEO Cooney was recently elected chair of the California Transit Agency. And prior to that served as vice chair and a committee chair and was instrumental in getting this funding made available by the state. So that's one of the reasons we get to do this. So, all right, with that, we have a motion in front of us that these by Member Moreno, seconded by Member Bush, that the executive committee forward a recommendation to the board of directors to approve the SB 125 allocation package. And I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Whitburn,
Yes.
Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Montgomery Steppe is absent. Hall,
Yes.
Moreno,
Moreno, yes.
Bush,
Bush, yes.
Coble.
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 members voting yes and 1 member absent.
Thank you, clerk. All right, before
Just
we,
a real
oh,
quick question,
yes.
just for the purposes of accurate record keeping, I'm not sure if count, if council
Agreed.
president or now
Mhm.
supervisors Montgomery Steppe should be noted as absent. The seat would have probably been.
It was filled concurrent with her being appointed to
Okay.
the Board of Supervisors.
Got it, okay, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not, as long as she's not being marked absent from her role.
No. And by our bylaws, the county's position is always on the executive
Just
committee.
default. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Further clarification, so she is a member,
She's now a member of the MTS board and therefore the member of the executive committee.
representing the county board of supervisors.
Correct.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, before we go into closed session, let's skip ahead to our other items. Item 8 is a review of the draft agenda for next week's board meeting. Any,
If I could make a couple of suggestions. So we have the PLA finally coming back. The Labor Council has approved the language. There's nothing really substantially different from what the executive committee heard before.
Except that we added a clarification that was brought up when we brought it to the executive committee in just September, wanting to confirm and clarify what would happen if a worker was not provided by the union within 48 hours, that then the union couldn't come back later and require that the employee placed in that position be replaced, so that it has been added into the document itself.
So my suggestion would be that we could put it on consent. Certainly board members could pull it and say, I would like to, have a discussion, but if you're willing, we could put that on consent.
I have a lot of closed sessions for you all next week, which will take a lot of time.
I'm okay with putting it on consent. I would like to see that wording prior to sending it out.
Absolutely.
And then the other one is the legislative program. If you're okay with putting that on consent as well, we will do that. And then I wanted to just highlight a few of these agenda items for you. Items 7 and 8 are basically accepting grants that we were awarded, and these are really community facing grants, Buyer Boulevard beautification, as well as a South Bay transit beautification project that we worked with the communities on and we were awarded. So those we would like to put on consent. And then item 10, we're bursting at the seams in this building. And so the county is moving out of the last remaining offices they have on 8th floor. So we would like to add that because we need more space, because in items 11, 12, and 13, we're asking you to add more full-time equivalents, primarily to help us spend the SB 125, but also in we've been very successful in getting grants for our capital program. So this would be adding some procurement staff, some capital staff, project management staff, as well as somebody for the IT department. IT is becoming more and more complex for transit agencies everywhere. And so we just have been trying to, grow as the technology gets more complex. And then the final one is we have flaggers that are MTS staff members in the trolley area, and they've always been managed by our line supervisors in the transportation department. But it's getting to the point where we actually need dedicated staff just for the flaggers because we have so many flaggers. The rules changed. We now have to have 2 flaggers in every position versus 1, which used to be the case in the past. Flaggers basically make sure that the roadway workers are actually protected while they're doing their jobs on constructing within the roadway or within the railway. And so we want to add some supervisor staff as well as taking some of our transportation drivers, trolley operators from part-time to full-time. We employ part-time because we do, 300 special events a year. We have to have accommodations during construction projects and things like that. So we've been employing some people for basically full-time work. We want to move them into full-time positions. There's a slight cost with that, but we think it'll be a much more efficient way to operate going forward. So those are the things I wanted to highlight for you on the calendar. But
And the only thing that I would add is that we added, after this agenda went out, there were a couple more consent items that we put on the agenda to get through, which one is just adjusting our STA claim to add additional dollars because the actual allocations of funds came in higher, and you always have to revise your resolution. We have to open an investment account to hold those SB 125 plan or funds. So, and then the other one that you all may be familiar with in the summer, in order to resolve the strike, the board gave us authorization to fund a bump in some additional drivers' wages and benefits to get the workers back to work. That since then, to avoid similar strike actions, we have negotiated with Transdev for the 2 other unions with operators in the East County and at Copley Park. And so this would just be confirming the MTS's authorization to provide that kind of commensurate bump that we did for the South Bay operators for the others. So that will also be on consent.
Very good. Thank you. Seeing no further discussion on that item, we'll move to item number 9, any staff or committee member communications? Seeing no additional staff or committee member communications, the executive committee's next meeting date will be January 11th, 2024. And we will now move into closed session. Thank you.
Reporting out of closed session from the MTS Executive Committee meeting on December 7th, 2023. Closed session item number 6, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation pursuant to Government Code Sections 54956.9 D2 and EF. One potential case, the Executive Committee received a report from legal counsel. On item number 7, closed sessions conference with legal counsel, existing litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9 D1 in the Gracia Figueroa versus Nathan Fletcher matter. The Executive Committee received a report from legal counsel.
This meeting is now adjourned.